Thank you very much, Damien. And just while we change over slides again, bear with us, everybody. I just thought I'd point out we're beginning to see some themes coming up in the many questions that you're submitting. Thank you. Just to give our officials a bit of a heads up, I suppose, really, we're seeing themes around the requirements for IPAFs. Who can register for IPAFs and how? What certificates are needed for what product and when do you need them and how do we go about getting them? There's some questions about the transit regulations and a number of questions about very small consignments, business to customer consignments. Do they still need certificates? I'm afraid I know the answer to that, but I won't spoil the story, and we'll come back to that in a little while. And I'm delighted now to hand over to Helena and Luke and various trade associations for the part 2, where we're going to have a technical session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Luke Myers. I'm here today on behalf of Heather Jones, who many of you in the audience may know. A bit of a different look and feel for this section because this is going to be a bit more interactive. We're going to have trade associations speaking with us today. Without further ado, could I have the next slide, please? So I will be hosting today alongside Damien, who we've just heard from. Hello, Damien. I'll hand over to you, Damien, just to introduce some people on your side, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. Thanks very much for that. From the Daph side, we have a number of colleagues on the line who are going to help us in answering the questions from the trader organisation. So we have Tony Devlin, who's the head of our veterinary health implementation team. Lorna Meany, who's the head of our veterinary export policy team. Micheál O'Mahony from the Sea Fishery Protection Agency. Conor O'Mahony from our dairy division. Fiona Reardon, who works with Lorna and has been heavily involved in the trials and testing we've been doing. Michael Moran also works with Lorna and has been heavily involved in the export certification and the trader notices and the veterinary notices to details for providing certification. Kevin McKeever from our organics division, and Ray Broderick from our animal byproducts division. And we're also joined by Rob Doyle, who is the director, which has responsibility for all of this. So Rob is the big boss. Thanks, Luke.
Well, thank you. And I will hand over to my colleague Helena, who is leading from Defra today, to introduce some folks from Defra.
Good morning. I'm really delighted that we have a really strong panel for you from Defra. Of course, you've got myself as Deputy Director for EU Strategy Negotiations, and Jack, who you just heard from, who's one of our engagement and communications managers. But we also have Nigel Benwell, who is the head of our engagement, communication and business team in our Borders Protocol Delivery team. We have Vicky Clark in our plant health and imports delivery space. Leila Kituyi, who is a EU to GB animal imports operability team lead. Jack Tilbury, who you might have heard from before, who is our policy delivery and engagement lead on the import of animals and their products. Anthony Ridge, who's a veterinary advisor, particularly on veterinary trade facilitation. Scott Reaney, who's co-head of imports and EU trade, who can cover off transits. Suzanne Verhoeven, who is a products of animal origin imports policy lead. Angela Cooper, who knows all about IPAFs and is the IPAFs project manager. Lisa Ramsey, who's also a communications manager, as well as Angela Derbyshire. So I hope we have enough of the right sort of people to be able to answer any questions that you might want to put to us.
Thank you, Damien and Helena. I mean, I can see Margaret already rubbing her hands together. For the Q&A session, we have such a good and extensive panel from both sides. If I could just have the next slide, please, quickly, before we get into the hearing from the industry. So just very quickly, some updates from us. The Haulier Handbook has been published. I've just posted a link in the chat. This, I think, is a really good demonstration of the links we have with industry. There was a lot of collaboration from EU hauliers as well as UK hauliers. And without wishing to embarrass anybody who might be about to speak, I know Logistics UK and their representative Sarah was extremely involved in that process as well. So it shows the engagement we have with industry and how you help lead our communication strategy and what we put out. We also have our regular meetings with industry as well, of which this forms a part, and I won't bore you with any further details from that slide. You can have a look in your own time. If we could have the next one, please. We had a meeting, it was all the way back in February now, with some Irish associations and UK counterparts and officials from both sides as well. Damien was on that meeting, I believe, way back when. Some groupage loads resolved. Defra spoke about that earlier, and there's further information available, so thank you for that. And the IPAF system guidance, again, Defra addressed earlier in the presentation today. There's also materials available online, and I know from the questions in the chat that many of you have been involved in IPAF trials and so on. Some ongoing there as well, which we may talk about today. So without further ado, could I have the next slide, please? We've got 4 industry speakers today representing some of the key sectors for agri-food, both the food sector themselves and the logistics sector across both UK and Ireland. So I think, Damien, unless you'd like to say anything, the plan is to just get straight to industry. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Could I ask Luke Hindlaw from the Food and Drink Federation, please, to speak first?
Yeah, thank you, Luke. So my name is Luke Hindlaw. I represent the Food and Drink Federation. We represent food and drink manufacturers here in the UK, and there's probably a lot of joint members across that of a presence in Ireland. So I think before I go into some of the issues that we would like to cover, I think it's probably useful to provide a bit of context in terms of data around what's been happening on trade, and that'll give you a bit of idea of why we're raising the problems we're raising. So FDF publishes quarterly data on trade between the EU and the UK since 1st of Jan. We've just recently published our half-1 stats, so that covers from Jan to June. For trade with Ireland, that showed about a drop of about 500 million in exports to Ireland compared to Jan 19, and about 400 when you compare it to Jan 2020. For imports, it's pretty much exactly the same. You've got about a £500 million drops when you compare it to Jan 19, and then 400 when you compare it to the same period back in 2020, and for the EU as a whole, it's about a £2 billion drop. And the patterns within that pretty much are the biggest droppers are in the SPS category, and that's why we want to raise those kind of as the big problem. So you typically see the big drops in cheese, beef, any sorts of dairy products, and that kind of takes us into the main problems we want to raise with you today, which are the process between getting the EHC signed between the trader and the OV, and then the pre-notification time requirements in that. So on the first problem, I think one problem we've seen since 1st of January really is around the complexity of getting the EHC signed and that process between the OV and the trader. So getting the vet on particularly the GB to the EU side to be able to sign that, getting the trader to kind of give the vet the amount of data, the assurances that they need to meet all of the regulations that are set out in the EHC is really quite a complicated process. It takes a lot of time, and that is probably the biggest reason why we saw a lot of consignments that were grounded at UK factories and they couldn't move into the EU, is really that process of that engagement between the haulier, the trader and the vet. And then I guess that stems from particular worry is that, from 1st of October and 1st of January, you see kind of a shift away from food and drink traders. It's for anyone who is the carriers of the goods, it's probably far easier for them to move furniture rather than it is food and drink, for the nature of the complexity of SPS on that one. And then as well, tapping into this, I think, is that there are some pretty notable shortages across the EU and the UK, particularly for OVs, and I think that's a worry. So we've had one member who's raised with us that they think they're sharing with about 20 companies of a single vet, and I guess that kind of taps into the worry around the kind of the timeliness of being able to do that. I think the second concern for us really is around the kind of pre-notification period. So SPS being the main area again, but there is a customs element that comes into it when it gets to the 1st of January. But going back to the SPS, I think the pre-notification times are really what can render supply chains really, or just kind of really slow them down. So we've got a 4-hour notification for October, which is very welcome. I think that'll still be tricky for a lot of traders, but I think the real worry is when we get to 1st of January, you've got that 24-hour notification period that ports are expecting. That really does bog supply chains down. And I think, it just kind of adds a layer of time to the supply chains we're used to, and it kind of probably makes it kind of harder to serve a fast-moving supply chain that we've come used to expect harder. So those are the main problems I wanted to highlight in this call. I think I'm passing over to our good friend Paul Kelly at IBEC now.
Thanks very much, Luke, and good morning, everybody. I'm Paul Kelly, Director of Food Drink Ireland in IBEC, representing food and drink companies in Ireland. And as Luke indicated, we've many common members with the FDF, and I think it's important to note, in terms of the two countries, we are each other's largest export market, and that's not a situation that is likely to change. So thanks for the opportunity to contribute here this morning. Very much echoing Luke's comments, it's important to note at the outset that we are discussing 24/7 supply chains. So you're talking about short turnaround times and just-in-time deliveries. So the resources of the authorities on both sides of the Irish Sea really must be sufficient to support the current business model in areas like the timely provision of health certificates, short and pre-notification periods, clear routing through border controls, and consistency in border checks. And of course, we would like to see the EU and the UK agree on a move to digital certs as soon as possible, and that's a point I'm going to come back to. So clarity is key for business planning, and there are still outstanding queries that we have for both the 1st of October and the 1st of January. I think a number of these are starting to pop up in the chat, along with other questions and queries that will be addressed in the Q&A, but just a couple of ones specifically for myself. For the 1st of October. Question number 1, will chilled mince and meat preparations be prohibited from the 1st of October? Secondly, is it mandatory to have the truck number on the certificates to GB, or will trailer number or seal number be sufficient? Then, in relation to the land bridge transit of products of animal origin from the 1st of October, the question remains, can an EU-based exporter complete the IPAS notification? There is simply no GB importer in this scenario. And the final one from us from the 1st of October, some EU product of animal origin exporters have agreements with GB customers for delivery duty paid. And in this case, the GB customer requires the EU exporter to look after all the customs and SPS paperwork. Therefore, can the EU-based exporter register the pre-notification on IPAS? Moving out a couple of months to the 1st of January, obviously we're looking at the introduction of the BCPs, the border control posts. So our question is, where will the Irish Sea BCPs be located? Both any temporary BCPs and the permanent BCPs when they are built. And for both scenarios, how will selected consignments be directed there? Second one is the issue of pre-notification. I certainly would agree with everything Luke has said about that. It's a real concern, I think, from the members in terms of just-in-time supply chains. We obviously have the derogation essentially applied for the 3 months of October, November, December down to 4 hours. And then when we move to the 1st of January, the intention is 24 hours pre-notification with the derogation to 4 hours. And that derogation then to be decided upon on essentially a consignment by consignment level by the individual port health authorities. So our question is, will guidance on how that derogation be applied be issued to port health authorities, and when, essentially to ensure consistency in the approach at each BCP? And our final one, again, just to come back to the issue of the digital certs, when can we expect an agreement between both parties on the use of electronic rather than physical certs, and what are the outstanding issues to be addressed? So that's it for myself. I'll pass over to logistics colleagues at this stage. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think I'm next. My name is Sanitary from Logistics UK. Thanks for the opportunity to contribute today. I must say that I could support almost all the points that have been made previously. Many of them were on my list as well. But to start with, I'd like to, just by way of introduction, highlight how adaptable the supply chains have been when the trading conditions changed at the end of the transition period. And I'm not only saying this to really highlight the good work done by this industry, but also because this shows that the policy changes, the policy decisions that are made, even the technical ones, have very concrete effects on trade patterns and traffic patterns. And this is something to bear in mind, and I will refer to that when I raise some of the specific points after that. But we've seen, for instance, that the popularity of the land bridge has reduced at the beginning of the year. And even if it's not necessarily a definitive change, really policy decisions have to take into account how sensitive supply chains are. So in terms of the questions, we still have the things that are not fully clarified or not completely reassuring. I would like to insist on the facilities for inbound checks, for instance, at Welsh ports for the land bridge. That's probably more for the beginning of January next year, but there are still concerns in the logistics community around the readiness of facilities. So if there's a status update regarding the exact organization of the checks on the UK side, and what this organization means in terms of dimensioning and staffing the facilities, that would be useful to get a better sense of where we are going. And in relation to that, information about the charging policy for the physical checks that will be conducted in those facilities would also be welcome, bearing in mind that there could be level playing field implications if the charging policies are different across different locations. Again, in relation to the adaptability of the supply chains and what it could mean in terms of trade routes. My next point is about official vet capacity, and this is twofold. This is on the certifying side, and in this case it would be in the Republic of Ireland. I welcome the information that has been provided about the redeployment of staff, the recruitment that has been conducted. So in addition to that, there's also a question about the exact location of those certifying officers. It's not only about having a sufficient number of them, it's also about making sure that they can reach the right locations depending on the groupage models, for instance, that have been used. So that's also something I'm not completely clear about for the upcoming deadlines. And the second aspect about official vet capacity is about capacity on the UK side, because as more physical checks are taking place in border control posts, a number of the vets that are currently in the UK will be required to complete those tasks. So an update about how this affects overall capacity would be welcome. And the last point, trying to insist on the driver end of things. And I think our colleague from IBEC mentioned that should the vehicle be selected for physical checks, what is the exact process and what contingencies are in place to notify the driver that his vehicle or her vehicle has been selected for physical checks? And follow-up question, what is the process for unaccompanied freight when consignments are identified and selected for physical checks? And in the interest of time, I will stop here. Thanks very much.
Good morning, Aidan Flynn from the Freight Transport Association of Ireland. I suppose the key issues from our members that are involved in import and export of products of animal origin, fish and plants from Great Britain's perspective resonates with what has already been highlighted. Whilst key dates for implementation of control measures have been predetermined, the ongoing uncertainty created through the complex nature of the distribution regulatory requirements and by the lack of information available is creating significant problems for businesses. The additional costs associated with the new rolling requirements are crippling, and those involved in groupage, particularly the movement of multiple loads for multiple clients, is becoming untenable. The irony of this is that logistics is all about efficiencies and speed and certainty of delivery. With the environment at the top of the global agenda, the implications of post-Brexit trade requirements are ensuring that vital trade distribution functionality is taking a beating and becoming less efficient, more costly, and leading to the requirement for more rolling stock on our roads that results in more emissions. These issues do not seem to resonate at a political level, evidenced by the lack of urgency to establish key committees detailed in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. It is through these committees that trade simplifications for the movement of agri-food and the defining of trusted trader programmes needs to urgently deliver solutions for all traders. and in the meantime, the sustainability of business, particularly small to medium-sized businesses, continues to be challenged. We'd like to raise the following points for consideration by the British authorities. And I know some of this has already been covered in the slides today. Who is responsible for adding the information onto IPAFs? And whilst GB guidance advises that from October the 1st, all documentary checks will take place electronically and remotely, more information and clarification is needed on the levels of physical and documentary checks, and whether or not they will take place in the ports or the environs of the ports, and what levels of checks are to be expected from October. Also, if checks are to take place electronically, why then must the original health certificate accompany the load? What evidence will the driver accompanied haulier have to have upon arrival in British ports? And will the GVMS GMO registration require details of the IPAF's registration? Given that the importer is responsible for pre-notification, how will the haulier know that the pre-notification has been made? What are the consequences for the haulier if the pre-notification has not been made? Regarding unaccompanied trailers, are original health certificates required, and what will the British-based haulier will have to present when collecting trailers and bringing the load to its import destination? Regarding the land bridge, will products of animal origin have to be pre-notified in IPAFs, and who is responsible for doing this? Again, if documentary checks are to be electronic, can you provide more information for companies using the land bridge as to this process, and will original health certificates be required? And for companies importing products of animal origin, say from the Netherlands via the land bridge into Ireland, will health certificates be required, and can more information be provided in terms of new paperwork requirements from October? Some issues for consideration for our Irish officials, noting the various models of groupage with Daphne's preference for the consolidation model. Can Daphne provide an update on your engagement with industry and your understanding of the resources required to meet the demand of industry? Have you an Activate Reach programme to industry to ensure that where the consolidation model or linear model is applied, that there will be the necessary vet resources to ensure a functioning supply chain? And can you furnish details, particularly for companies that because of volumes or economies of scale will not have full-time on-site vets, on the process for booking services and how reliable that service will be? Who will be responsible for maintaining the service levels? Are you working currently with industry to adopt working time to meet industry demand? As you know, logistics 24/7 environment and moving fresh food and requires certification out of normal working hours. Will the department be resourced to facilitate this? And finally, will there be checks at Irish ports, aside from normal PBN requirements, that pre-notification has been completed on IPAFs and original health certificates are accompanying the load? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Aidan, and thanks to all the speakers today. Lots to reflect on, and I think judging from the Q&A in the chat, it feels like that resonates well with the wider audience as well. So thank you for that summary. Damien, I don't know, there was a few for Daph there. I think most of them were for our side in the UK. Do you want to start with the few that were mentioned for Daph in those presentations, and then we can go over to Defra colleagues?
Yeah, thanks, Luke, and I want to thank the contributors for making the time today and sharing their concerns with us. Yeah, so look, I've tried to capture the ones that for Daph, and maybe we can come back to the ones if I miss anything. But I'll just reflect on some of them, and then I'll call in my colleagues who have much more detail and they can respond. So as I see it, one of the big questions is about the certification and the capacity to actually deliver the certification. I covered some of the preparation that we're doing in my presentation. So I mean, there has been lots of engagement directly locally with food businesses, and those discussions are ongoing about refining business processes and aligning systems to be able to support certification as required by business. But it's clear that business will have to adapt as well. You know, we only have a limited resource that has to, and so those conversations are ongoing and are constructive. But I'll pass it on to my colleagues as well. The other one was around e-certification. Again, there are discussions ongoing between the EU and the UK on that about putting in place an e-certification approach. It's not going to happen by the 1st of October, obviously. But there are early 2022 is the current timeline that we have for that. And then the other key one that was raised by colleagues was around the 24 hours, and it's linked to the vet capacity, about 24/7 operations and out of hours. Again, we're doing a lot of work on that locally with food business to ascertain what the challenge is there and to try and come up with solutions. Again, my colleagues will go into more detail on that. And we've also had an out of our survey as well, which is informing management decisions about redeployment of staff and reorganisation of staff. So that's an ongoing, that's a work in progress, and we're working through that at the moment. And the other big one then for us was the groupage and how groupage would be serviced. We're focused on consolidation hub approach or a linear model approach where pallets may be sealed and then picked up in multiple locations. Again, my colleagues will touch on that about how we're going to go about that and how we're going to resource that. So with that, maybe just as an overview, I'll pass you on to my colleague Lorna Meany, who maybe can address those questions in more detail, and she might call in other colleagues, including Tony Devlin and other colleagues as appropriate. So Lorna, maybe can I hand over to you to give your perspective on those questions?
Lorna, sorry, I think you're on mute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so just to go through the list of questions there again, the use of electronic certificates is being explored. My understanding is it's being explored and negotiated between the EU and GB, and maybe GB colleagues might have further information and could update us further on that, but my understanding is that it's at a fairly advanced stage, but it certainly won't be in place before the 1st of January. So those negotiations are ongoing, and obviously they would be of major benefit in smoothing out the certification process for everybody involved. So we are, we're very anxious that would happen. And I suppose as regards the cover, we're not in a position to provide 24/7 cover. But what we have been doing is we've been engaging locally with businesses who have flagged an out of hours requirement. So I suppose businesses should be engaging with their local department staff at the moment to find solutions that meet the certification demand in line with certification requirements and the OCR. Without putting undue demands on what Damien has already alluded to, our limited resources. So these are being dealt with on a case-by-case basis, and they will require engagement with us, and it will require flexibility on the behalf of the businesses as well to work with us to find solutions. So as Damien said in his presentation, it's really, really important that people engage locally, really important. With the people who certify on the ground, they should know who does their regular approvals and inspections. So if one of the key messages here, if you haven't already engaged with your local department officials, you should definitely start doing that now. In terms of, I suppose it's just important to say as well that it isn't business as usual. There's now an extra step in the journey to the UK with the health certificate requirement, and we do have a limited veterinary resource. But just to move on to the other questions around what we've been doing as regards securing extra resources, we've already recruited. The recruitment process has taken place, and so there are already extra resources either in place or will be in place very, very soon. We have been, we have plans, if necessary, to redeploy staff in from other areas if that is required. And we also have some staff taken on temporary contracts. So all of those things together, plus working with industry to find solutions, you know, will help in our preparedness for the 1st of October as regards our resource need. And I suppose it's important to say also that, you know, in our preparations, we have been involved in training our own staff in the new certification requirements, in our and also training our FBOs. We've had multiple seminars all through the summer, you know, dealing with the IT systems that we're using, the Traces system in particular, and also the certification requirements. We've had certification days this week where we've encouraged food businesses to engage with us to do mini trial runs right across the board to ensure that the processes that we have in place are working. And we have plans for a certification week the week after next, where we'll be doing more of that. So all of this should help to make sure that we have sufficient processes in place for the 1st of October. I don't know if my colleague Tony Devlin wants to come in on any of those points.
Hello, thanks, Lorna. Yeah, just to pick up on a couple of points. So in relation to out of hours trade and those aspects, we have undertaken very comprehensive surveys of what the demand is. And we're now in a position where the local veterinary inspectors are engaging with the businesses to see if some of that trade can be moved into more, I suppose, more manageable blocks within certification windows. And where that's not possible, then we're looking for what we call the pinch points, where there is a demand and we may not have a service, so we can look at that and see what we can do in the coming weeks to be able to provide as much of a service as possible. As has been said, like, it's not business as usual, so there has to be some movement on the business side to allow for, you know, the limited veterinary resource. And, you know, we have gone into extensive recruitment, we have redeployment, and we have temporary contracts of experienced staff. So we're trying to identify where the greatest demands are and allocate resources to those points. But it's key, a key part of that is that the businesses themselves engage locally and talk through their demands, talk through their systems and what can be done. Some of the delays may be initially due to non-familiarization with traces, and we have done extensive training on traces, on the traces systems. And even in spite of that, we know that some businesses maybe haven't fully engaged with that. So for that reason, we're doing some more training at the end of the month. So that'll be a chance for those maybe that haven't fully engaged to get involved, because some of the problems that are arising and the delays that are arising in the trials that we've done to date are that, you know, maybe the wrong cert has been submitted, the wrong commodity codes. There's been lack of practice just in using the traces systems and having the correct traceability documentation that is needed. So the more accurate information that's submitted with the type 1 application or the part 1 of the traces application, then the easier it is for the certifying veterinary surgeon to sign off and get the documentation back to the business, which we understand is you know, time sensitive. On the DPCS system, then that's also going to be tried throughout. It's been tried throughout this week, and there will be further trials ongoing. So it's really practicing the generation of the health certificates and the logistics and getting them back to the drivers. And we're working on that, and we're working through that a week from now until, I suppose, the 1st of October. So we should have a good idea of where the pinch points are, where the demand is, and maybe where we can make adjustments to what our preparations are to meet the demands. So that's just where we are at the moment. Thanks, Lorna.
So thanks, Tony and Lorna. Look, I mean, you can hear there, look, there's just so much going on and has been going on, and it's still going on and will be right up until the 1st of October. Just to reiterate, from the department's point of view, we're fully committed to delivering the service that's needed and working with industry to deliver that service. But we do need industry to work with us, and those conversations are ongoing. So as the guys said, the really key message is engage with us, particularly at local level, to make sure that your business and our service can be matched as much as possible. And we're committed to delivering what's required to make sure that any disruption to trade with GB is minimised from the 1st of October. So look, maybe I'll hand back to you, and then, because I know there's quite a few questions for Defra colleagues, and maybe we can let this session run, because I think a lot of the questions are very similar to what's coming in on the chat. So maybe we can run through the questions that were posed to Defra colleagues. That would be a good way of leading into our Q&A session, our more broader Q&A session. Thanks.
Thank you, Damien. Yes, I think I agree. There's lots of good questions here. Just to note, on the engagement side, totally echo that as well. We appreciate there's still a lot of uncertainty and questions from businesses. We are on the UK side also running many events, some of them in collaboration with other administrations, like today, many UK administration only. I know Defra have their own events, which Helena has plugged some of earlier in the presentation, and which the information is available online. And BPDG are also running events, again, some of them in collaboration with Defra as well, which Margaret will be able to talk about a little bit at the end and provide information and links to. So just quickly onto the Defra questions then, Helena. I know Damien spoke about the e-certification. I don't know if there's anything you want to add there, but it seems like the first question to address is on the UK side, the EHC requirement, and what happens if the EHC isn't there.
Thank you very much. I think the thing that what I would like to do is actually, rather than me talking in generalities, I will pass you straight on to my experts, who can talk about a lot of the things that that colleagues from the industry were reflecting upon. I'd just like to say, before I pass on to my experts, that I am familiar with a lot of the messages that were coming through from the industry, particularly about just-in-time supply chains, the challenges of groupage, and making sure that the systems work as smoothly as possible, given how we are talking about our food supply after all. So with that in mind, I think I would just really like to hand over to my colleague Jack Tilbury, who's going to talk about a whole load of the questions that you were posing. Thank you, Jack.
Thanks, Helena, and hopefully everyone can hear me okay. So I've pulled a few bits out that I'll speak to from what we just heard from industry, but I'll start with the question, Luke, that you just raised. So what happens if there is no EHC with the consignment from the 1st of October? Now, I think the thing to stress is that it is a legal requirement to pre-notify and have the EHC, but there are no customs holds in place from the 1st of October. Those are only introduced from the 1st of January. From the 1st of October, we'll be carrying out the remote documentary checks, and this is very much a period where the Port Health authorities will check those notifications, check those health certificates, and will be able to give feedback based on that. And we very much see this as a really important build-up to the 1st of January. That feedback, can prove critical to help you avoid in delays when those checks do come in from the 1st of January, and when those customs holds are in place, because as soon as you reach the 1st of January, if you haven't notified and you haven't got the required documentation, you're very likely to be called into the BCP, and you will be held, and the consignment potentially will be rejected or returned. As I said, I pulled out just a couple of other key themes I'll talk to, and then perhaps see if any of my other colleagues want to come in. And I think the first one is the pre-notification times. I know it was noted that we recently issued some guidance allowing industry to apply the 4-hour derogation themselves. And there's some questions around what the approach will be from January. I think it's important to note that the legislation specifies 1 working day in advance, and that the competent authority at the border control post can apply that derogation. And I think there was a question around whether Defra would set a central application, and we won't. It is going to be down to the Port Health authorities. The 1st of October onwards is going to be a good opportunity for the Port Health authorities to get a better understanding of the time taken for the documentary checks, and they'll be able to use that understanding, and the experiences they're having from the 1st of October to determine how and when they may choose to apply those derogations. I think the critical thing to remember as well is that each BCP does operate differently. It will be dependent on the routes taken to arrive at that port, and also the local circumstances. In terms of what we'll do as part of that process, we will obviously continue to work with the port health authorities to understand how and when they're going to choose to make that derogation available from the 1st of January. And if there is, something we can do to make sure that information is readily available and easy to access, then I'm sure there's a role for us there, and we'll pick that up. So the next thing, slightly related, I suppose, I wanted to talk through was IPAFs and who can submit the notification. And I saw there were quite a few questions in the actual Q&A as well relating to this. So for imports into Britain from the EU, it must be the person responsible from the consignment must have a UK address, and it's them that will need to raise the notification and be detailed on the application. I did see a few questions around what will happen where you ship direct to consumer, and the guidance is the same. It must be someone with a UK-based address. So in those circumstances, if you don't have a UK entity that can raise that notification for you and be detailed, you may need to look to employ a UK-based agent who can be that entity and raise that notification. I will run through a couple more. I won't talk for too much longer. The charging policy came up as well, and I just wanted to reconfirm that from the 1st of October, port health authorities won't be levying any fees and charges. So no fees and charges for SPS checks from the 1st of October, but that from the 1st of January, they will be able to levy fees and charges. And again, those will be set by the port health authority, similar to the application of the notification derogation. But again, if there is something that Defra can do to make that information more easily accessible and centrally available, then I'm sure we will look to do that. And finally, I just wanted to talk very briefly about groupage, not in any depth, but I did see there were a few questions in the Q&A asking around about seals and official seals versus commercial seals, and I have gone through and answered a couple of them referring to the linear model, but I just wanted to plug that we do have some recordings that talk through each of the models in much more depth than we've been able to do so today. And we do have some additional guidance, some one-pages that set out the models and Q&As that will talk through, what we mean by official seals and commercial seals, and how those are applied. So there's clearly a keen interest there, and I would, Helen, I'm sure, will be able to send the link round to those materials, and people can access that. And I think that would be helpful to get that better understanding than we were able to give you this morning. I will stop there. I don't know if any of my colleagues want to come in and pick up anything I've missed.
Thank you. I will pause for effect briefly, just to check if anybody wanted to come in before we get stuck into the more detailed Q&A. But I don't think so. No, in which case I think I'm handing back to Luke and Margaret for the start of the Q&A session. Thank you.